was never asked to stop a horse, but I did twice in big races. I stopped one in the Grand National, one in the Gold Cup through incompetence.
Already hailing Pendle as the winner of the 1973 Gold Cup. He's surely only got to jump this fence between Pendle and victory. The Dickler putting in a good run in second. Pendle's over the Dickler second and Charlie Bottine third. And racing into the final 150 yards, it's Pendle being pressed by the Dickler. The Dickler putting in a great run over on the far side. He's going to go up.
And a warm welcome to this Barstewards Special Sermon, this one. We've got a special guest of me and John, and this fellow has ridden 427 winners in a career that spanned, if I'm right, about 16 years, and he has ridden several big race wins, including the King George, the Champion Hurdle, the Hennessy, the Whitbread. The one thing that eluded him was, and he's probably most famous for, was getting beat on crisp in the Grand National. Welcome, Richard Pitman.
Yeah, thanks. But there were two things that eluded me. I rode odds-on favourite Pendle in the Gold Cup 2 years running.
Indeed.
Got beat a short head the first time by the Dickler and got brought down at the third last when running away in 1974. So when I retired, it was the days of the Sporting Life, big broadsheet. And the front page was a huge banner saying in 2-inch high letters, failure. Underneath that was 1.5-inch letters saying failure. And then below that was an inch column, failure. Now you imagine that. I knew I was an all right, moderate jockey, did a bit of good as well as not good. But, that was a hard pill to swallow. But they were correct. And as you know, journalists write a story and the sub-editor will pick up what he thinks is relevant. And that's the headline. And he was right. I failed to win the Jockey's Championship. I was second twice, both times to Ron Barry. I failed to win the Gold Cup, second twice. And I failed to win the National, second twice.
Wow, you're like the Jimmy White, the Zimbabwe opposition party of racing's jockeys, Richard. I mean, but the amazing thing is, back in the day, you were more celebrities than what jockeys would be now, because racing was at the forefront of the media, wasn't it? Like you said, the Grand National was a massive thing. You were in the spotlight all the time. But it's interesting to hear you say that they wouldn't write those headlines now, would they?
Well, the page wouldn't be big enough on the Racing Post to get them all in.
Absolutely. How did you cope at that time with that kind of run that you had?
Quite easily. In fact, I thought I rode 470 winners, and only 22 of those were in the first 7 years of my career. That
Really?
is an average of 3 a year. The first 4 years, no winners from 60 rides. And then in the next 3 years, 22 winners. And then it got better. I had a 5-year real good bash with Fred Winter when we had really good horses. I mean, you mentioned Crispin, Pendle, Lanzarote, Killiney was a good horse. And I rode Beulah after Paul Kellaway had moved on. I rode him in his first season over fences, 5 rides or 6 rides, 5 wins. So some really good horses. We used to go to Kempton and Sandown and Newbury at the weekends, and we would have 2 winners every time, maybe 3.
Yeah.
It was an incredible journey, and I was so lucky to be on it.
Yeah. I mean, at the time when you rode Pendler, I've read somewhere that you described him as a horse that he did nothing in front. You had to make sure to try and get there at the right time or he'd start pulling himself up.
Yep, correct. But quite often in his 2 King Georges, he was in front for half a mile and was pulling up underneath me. He was a good horse, and I didn't want to go and slap him or anything. So I was keeping hold of, changing the rein, keeping hold of his head and growling at him, A growl is a great thing for a horse. It's a different noise, you see, to what they're used to. So that was why I probably lost 1 Gold Cup, maybe 2. Fred Winter was a great jockey. And when he took me on, he said, look, Richard, you're not in the top 5 best jockeys riding, but you'll do me. He said, your horses jump better for you. After that, of course, horses jump better for Franklin than for anyone. But that's what he liked in a jockey. Jumping, because that's the name of the game. He said, we will lose some races that you should have won, but I will buy that if you can stick to being honest and horses jumping as they do. So when it came to Pendle odds on for the first Gold Cup, we're discussing it at breakfast a couple of days before, and I said, I'd like to come halfway up the run-in. And he burst out laughing. He said, look, it's a Gold Cup. Your odds on. You make a mistake at the last, you won't recover, they'll be gone. He said, I'd rather you were beaten coming too soon than coming too late. Well, how prophetic was that? Because, as you alluded to, he did everything right. I didn't go for a big one at the last. You didn't need to on him. He good judge of a stride himself, the horse. And he popped it, and 2 lengths clear, I suppose, of the Dickler. It's an amazing thing, you know, from a rider's perspective. That green sward of turf seems to go up to an arrowhead as it goes away to the stables at the end. And either side, a mad frenzy of people and colour, noise, throwing papers in the air, people who'd backed him, you know. And he dwelt and curled up underneath me, only for a stride or two, but it allowed the Dickler to get past me. And then he fought back. He'd got a racehorse to go with. He was a racehorse, and he fought back. And on the line, it was a short head. Stride later, I'm half a length in front. But they pay at the Jamstick, as you know. Well, the following year, we were talking again, and again he was odds on. And Fred Winter said, OK, you do what you want. And he was running away down the hill, and I've got High Ken in front of me, who wasn't the greatest jump in the world. But my plan was that I'd track him into the downhill fence, third last. I'd pull out, jump it, and then pull him back in again, you see. Get a lead up to the last. That was the plan. But a lot of people think jockeys have got no brains. Of course, they have. And both Ron Barry and Bobby Beasley saw me pulling the horse in behind High Ken, and they came up on my outside and shut the door. My escape route was there no longer.
Yeah.
And High Ken fell, and he brought Pendle down. Now, when you're falling, you hit a fence hard, you do a double somersault, and the whole world goes upside down. You know, it's not pleasant, it's very noisy. But when you're brought down, when you've jumped well, and a horse brings you down, it's like a tripwire. And it happens so quickly, and poor old Pendle had never fallen in his life. And he got up and stood there for a moment and shook his head as if to say, whoa, what's all this about? And you can imagine I felt desolate. But there is a story to this, which, if you don't mind me jabbering on,
no.
When I got into the paddock for the race, the guy who looked after him, Vince Brooks, looked like death warmed up. And I said, what's up, Clogger? That was his nickname. Are you a bit worried? He said, yes, and so should you be. And I said, well, why? And he told me there'd been a threat. He said at the time an IRA threat, I don't know if that's right or not, to shoot the horse if he hit the front. So Vince Brooks said, look, get this horse withdrawn at the start. You know, tell him he's laying. I said, you can't do that. Only the starter can do it. I can't do it. Can't get him withdrawn. And the punters deserve him to run. The owners deserve him to run. The trainer deserves him to run. The horse deserves to run. And when he was brought down, of course, he and Fred Winter probably initially thought the horse had been shot. But in the camaraderie in the weighing room, when I got back, I'm regaling the story to the great late Terry Biddlecombe, who's a real cavalier. He was riding the Queen Mother's horse, can't remember his name. And I said to him, you know, they were going to threat was to shoot the horse. He said, well, that's not very fair, is it? I said, no. He said, they might have missed you and got me.
Incredible, really. That I've read a little bit into that story. And in any way, any fear, Richard, before the race? Did you take it seriously?
No. Oh, I think the threat was serious because Vince Brooks had been sleeping with the horse for 10 nights in the stable, in the straw, with his horse, and then doing a day's work, and he was worried. But no, hey, once the tapes go up, you could have a broken bone. And in those days, we used to ride with a broken wrist or rib or something. You know, you can't get away with it now. No, once those tapes go up, you know, you're focused on one thing, and that is how you ride the race. I mean, you know, Ruby Walsh is the best pundit. John Franklin was great, but Ruby Walsh has had the opportunity with the amount of airtime they get now to explain about race riding and how a jockey thinks. And he did one with Lydia Hislop, probably from Racing TV, I suppose. And what he said on the way around really lit up how a jockey thinks at different parts of the course. And it's a puzzle, one that you have to have several alternatives to. So no, once you're out there, you concentrate on what you're doing. We may only get in one question here because this leads me on to, I was fourth on a horse called Freddie Boy for Fred Winter, who was a real leery old thing, you know, horrible, great, stick his head up in the air, good horse, but not honest. And so Fred Winter said, drop him out, you know, let him dawdle around, make him think he's at the fun unfair, and produce him late if he's good enough. Well, in those days, and you're probably too young to remember, where the tented village is now below the stands at Cheltenham was the racecourse. And the Gold Cup started in what is now the car park. We jumped one where the tented village is and then came out onto the main course. Well, I jumped one and was banged into the rails. Horse went down on his knees and luckily recovered and pottered around behind and ran on to finish fourth. It was a guy called Timmy Hyde who did it real hard, Jockey. And afterwards I said, Tim, that was rotten. He said, I never saw you. No, didn't see you. Anyway, he called Pat Taff over. Pat, would I do that to this lad? Would I? No, of course you wouldn't, Tim. About 20 years later, at drinks party, when we'd had a few, Tim Hyde came up to me. He said, you great soft girl's blouse, you. He said, of course I did, you. Getting rid of one horse early on was one less I've got to worry about later on. I mean, there's a million stories about races. A lot of conversation goes on in racing, not just how you're going, that sort of thing. All sorts of conversations. But anyway, so Gold Cup, a great race that escaped me twice, and Pendle deserved to be a dual Gold Cup winner.
Yeah, having watched footage, he was a great horse. What was the weighing room like back then, Richard? Obviously, the world's changing, it's a different place today. But what was the weighing room like back then? Camaraderie, etc., that kind of thing.
It's pretty much until recently, until the Robbie Dunn, Bryony Frost altercations that went on far too long and should never have got to the head they did. But it was pretty much the same. But one of the main contributing factors to that situation was the jockey's room is a sanctuary. Even trainers couldn't go in there. You've got to be a jockey, licensed to get in there, into the changing room. So therefore, whatever went on was just considered, well, we rule our own roost and there are no laws in here by the ones we make. And that wasn't so in this day and age. Now, if a CEO of a big company walks past a very attractive secretary and pats her on the bottom and says, oh, you're looking great today, my dear. She sues him for 200 grand. He loses his job. Yeah. Well, you can imagine fit, hard, athletic fellows. The girls had their own changing room, but had to go into the mail room for the trial scales and for the valets, because the valets didn't go into the girls' cabins. They only had porter cabins in many places. So you can imagine there were quite a few tensions and sexual alluding. The boys, until this Bryony Frost situation came up, could not see that there were no different to people in the workplace anywhere else. So that has changed considerably. But in my years and up until recently, the camaraderie is amazing because jumping, someone's going to get hurt and it's going to be you sooner or later. And it could be you many times. Jack Kennedy in Ireland, great jockey, only 24, had no end of injuries. Now, you feel for people. After racing, you drive to the hospital or phone their wife, take their clothes into the hospital. Because it's going to be you another day, And it can't say the same as a battlefield, but similar in a way that you are aware that it's a dangerous game.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, obviously times have changed with obviously Frost done, like you said, it was handled badly. It could have been done in a matter of weeks rather than the amount of time it took, which caused more media attention. It wasn't a good thing. But just going back to your comments, R.E. Fred Winter, about how you came to ride for him. And I just like what he said, because he says, Richard, I know you aren't the greatest jockey, but you can get horses to jump. So how did you learn that? Take me back to your sort of childhood. As were you schooling horses all the time?
No, I think having an eye for a fence is something that you have. I mean, Frankham was a show jumper, junior international show jumper, was always brilliant at an obstacle. You would never see him wrong. None of this pulling to shorten the stride or kicking to get a longer one. He was right when he got there. It's all about getting the striding right and keeping the horse relaxed so you're not pulling or pushing. And he feels the confidence. They could feel everything through your hands, down the reins, through the bit to their brain. They can feel you with your legs on their sides, if you're nervous or confident, going through to their heart, to their brain. They feel everything you feel. So if you were confident, you've got the right stride, you meet it right, you sit up the neck, you land running. It's great. So no, with myself, my sister was married to a jockey in the 50s, I suppose. She was keen I learned to ride. She could ride. My sister, they had one horse between them for messing about on. And she used to take me out with a neighbour's pony, not very well named. He was called Honey Bunch. He was a horrible little so-and-so. When you tried to catch him, he'd just turn his back on you and then kick. See? Horrible. So anyway, she would take me along the lanes around Cheltenham, Prestbury, where the racecourse is now, her on a bicycle, me on this pony, on the verge of the road. And she'd say, as horsey ladies do, okay, prepare to trot. So off we go, trot, trot, trot. Then she'd say, prepare to canter. I said, no, I don't want to canter, no. I hate it. So start crying. I was quite young at the time, I suppose. And she eventually got quite wise to it. Instead of saying prepare to canter, just whacked it round the backside. And I was flying up the verge, lovely, jumping all the gully ways. And once you've experienced speed, you realise this is great. So that progressed eventually. But as I said, I went 4 years without a winner. Riding for little stables that only had 5, 6, 7 horses. And you, as the boy, you got the horse with bad legs and the blind in one eye. When they got one with a chance, the jockey was put on. So eventually dawned on me, you can't go without the horses. Look how late in life Rachel Blackmore came to fruition. It was because she was able to team up through the O'Learys with Henry de Bromhead and made that job her own. And she is brilliant. I'm not saying the horses wouldn't have gone for anyone else. Of course they would. But it enabled her to show her talents. I mean, I've grown up from the start of ladies riding to this, what it is today, Flat and Jumping, Holly Doyle, and many more before them, going from them only having 5 rides a year to having 800, 1,000 rides a year. So things have changed. But Rachel has always been good at an obstacle. She reads a race well. She rides a good finish. She's got the lot. But for me, 4 years going around these small stables, never had a chance of a winner. And Fred Winter was about to retire at the age of 39, which was old for a jump jockey in those days. So I said to him in the weighing room at Cheltenham, actually, would you take me on when you start training? He said, yes. He said, I've had several offers of people wanting to come. I've only got 6 horses to join me to start with, but that will change. Anyway, he said, you'll have to take your chance among the rest of them, but you do have experience. So fine. I got a letter then, said, and he was married to an aristocratic lady, Fred, he wasn't like us old farmhands. And he wrote, Dear Pitman, not Richard, we've been in the same changing room for 4 years. Dear Pitman, I'm pleased to say that I shall be operational on June the 1st. You'll be the first, along with 2 others, to be in the yard. There is no accommodation, but we do have a very, very watertight hut by the tennis court. I'm sure you'll be fine until I can get accommodation. Can you imagine that in this day and age? Anyway, but he was a great man. Sorry, while I'm on this story, we grew very quickly, and he had American owners because he used to ride for them in America. He had Haley Mills, who was a great film star in those days, and the Coen brothers, who made films. And they came down one day in a Rolls Royce, and the Coen brothers got out with these velvet collared long coats on, and Haley Mills smiles and sashaying up the aisle. It was great. And I had 2 or 3 horses for them to look after. And another guy in the yard, Redvers Weaver, who was very correct and such a good lad and did everything right, whereas I was a bit of a jack-the-lad. I went and got his head collars, which were all leather head collars with brasses on them. And his were gleaming, you see, and mine were all green and mouldy because I was an idol so-and-so. So when Haley Mills went out from the second horse of hers, she just quietly slipped me 20 quid. Well, in 1964, 20 quid was very nice, thank you very much.
Absolutely, yeah.
Anyway, she went round, on went the party around the yard, you see, got to Redvers Weaver's, who was left with my tarnished green brass head collary things, you see. So as soon as they went out, Fred Winter bollocked him. Redvers came round to my stable as I'm quietly congratulating myself and said, you horrible little so-and-so, defend yourself. And he put his fists up like the old-fashioned pugilist, with one outstretched and one up bunched like that. Well, I'd never had a fight in my life. So while I was adjusting myself, he whacked me on the chin and downed me. And I'm lying in a puddle in the middle of the yard. I was always winded, fat little fellow. And Fred Winter and the entourage came round the corner with me lying in the puddle. So he picked me up by the ear and asked for an explanation. And I told him. So he then said to the others, the Coens and Haley Mills, oh, Brian, the head lad will take you on. I need to deal with this. And he took us by the ear each and put us in the tennis court and locked the gate and said, don't come out till you've sorted out your differences. I mean, he was a great man. So there was no shouting or anything. I was wrong. Oh, and he said, give the 20 quid back. I saw you got a drink off Haley. Give the 20 quid to Red. So a great man in every way.
Brilliant. No, what a story that is. And like you said, the old way of sorting differences out. It's the old bang your heads together kind of scenario and sort it out. Such miss the old days in many ways. Right, a different slant now to you personally. And what year did you get married to Jenny?
Why did you start stuttering then? Are you frightened as well?
Yes.
Would have been 1965. She came with me from Cheltenham to Lambourne, and we lived in a cottage of Foot Warwins, actually. Got married fairly quick. She was 19, I was 22. Far too early in life. Yeah. But I do admire her, though we don't get on and we have no reason to speak. I admire her. What she did in a male-orientated world was amazing. She got tough, and she had to survive, but her way of addressing the press was brilliant. Whereas they go up to David Nicholson and say, well, what can you say about the favourite here? Oh, he's working all right, and nothing. They go to Jenny and say, and what about he's like a rosebud and he's just about to burst into flower? She was brilliant and they loved her, and she attracted big owners. I mean, the first woman to win a Gold Cup, she won 2 and 2 Grand Nationals, and should have won 3. She won the one that was void with Escher-Ness. So a great trainer. But as she grew older and tougher, and I was still race riding as a jockey, it wasn't a nice environment, so I moved on.
On the subject of Jenny, Richard, when Carville's Hill got beat in the Gold Cup, you'll be on the Bay-Base A-team.
Correct.
I know Julian Wilson was very outspoken about the tactics that Jenny employed with Golden Phrase. Was that all a bit awkward after the race?
No, but not for me, it wasn't. But tactics are used all the time. Look at the number of runners Aidan O'Brien has in races, where one will make the running, the second one may take it up a bit later, they'll maybe leave a gap on the inner and then close it.
We've discussed many times on here.
I don't see there's anything wrong. And if you're not committing, like putting someone through a wing or anything like that, and we see it all the time where a jockey runs into a pocket, especially on the flat, jockey on his outside keeps him there. Yeah. It's nothing illegal. You're keeping your own line. As long as you keep straight to your line.
It's got the impression, Julian, that they had a fairly good bet on Carville.
Oh, you'd be right. You'd be right. Julian was a big punter, as was Peter O'Sullivan. Peter was a big punter. In fact, it's John Hamner's funeral tomorrow. I'm going.
Bless him.
Who was a race reader for Peter O'Sullivan all his career, but also commentator himself. And John spent more time running down from Peter's lofty position at the top of the stands, putting on £1,000 on something, than he was about calling the race. They'd be halfway through the race and Hamner would be puffing back up there to pick up the fallers and that sort of thing. Race reader is pretty important in a big field because while the main commentator is following the leaders, you need someone to pick up the fallers, because it's not that easy to take your bins and your mind away from the leaders to look back, because what happens? You've fallen in front then. You do need a race reader in big fields. So, Carville's Hill, what was Jenny's was? Golden Freeze, wasn't it?
Yeah, Tobias.
Yeah. Now, Carville's Hill was a known sloppy jumper. Good horse, but a sloppy jumper. And therefore, he set off in front to worry him. That's something that happens all the time. Jump jockeys. And she got very annoyed because she felt arrows were being fired at her, when I think now people would get up and say, yes, that was my intention, was to worry him out of it. Nothing wrong with that, in my view.
No. So either.
No, I know, he was controversial at the time, but I kind of, why should the big odds on Jolly get the run of the race? Precisely, yeah.
Just my overriding memory of it was an incandescent Julian Wilson.
I'm sorry, tell me what incandescent means then. I failed 9 O-levels.
Well, there was steam coming out the ears, the shirt collar, everywhere else that steam could come out of, I think. Yeah. He certainly wasn't a happy bunny.
No, so we might have to do another one of these another time, because I'll end long before you're finished.
Yeah.
On the subject of punting, Julian was a big punter. He was a big mate of Michael Stout's and used to go to Gallops every day, dine with him, with each other. And he was a big, successful punter. As I said, I was uneducated. Julian asked me to join the team 2 years before I did, but I had the 5 best horses in the country to ride. You wouldn't do it. You wouldn't give those to anyone, so I turned it down. Jimmy Lindley got the job, and And then Jimmy decided he didn't want to do the jumping because he liked to go to Hong Kong and he liked to go pheasant shooting and so he didn't want to do jumping. So I got the call again. And the second time I accepted it because I only had 2 horses in the top 5 and they were getting old, that sort of thing. So when I joined the BBC, Julian, who was very well educated, etc., except he did have a bit of a chip on his shoulder because he went to Harrow and not Eton. But anyway, that's he said to me, "Look, Richard, this is the sort of format. I run the show and you are the paddock man. And when I'm going on holiday to Barbados and South Africa, you can have 2 or 3 months after Christmas when racing was off because of the weather, etc." He said, "As long as you remember that I am you and you are non-you." Meaning I'm politically incorrect and don't know how to pronounce certain words. So as long as you know that and no opposition, that's fine. And that's how it was. Now, when Peter Skew joined us, Peter on television always stuttered like crazy, and in normal life and functions, he's funny as anything, doesn't stutter. But he found it quite hard going. And Julian would get up afterwards and read the riot act out loud, not directed at Skew, but directed at Skew through me. He would give me a right rocketing in order for Skew to try and fuck his ideas up. And the reason being is Skew was a very, very clever lad, very good form follower, reader of form, and he'd tip him the wink if he thought something would win. So Julian was very betting orientated all his life and very successful too.
The commentary team of the BBC back then was, in my eyes, one of the finest put togethers, really, because that was when I got interested in racing. I was in my teens. I used to bunk off school. When you used to do the midweek meetings, say Ascot, things like that, it was you, it was Julian Wilson, lovely pair of hands, Jimmy Linley.
Yeah.
Did you have the lovely pair of hands for the pheasant shooting, Richard?
I never used to look at them. They were covering my eyes at the time. But no, it was a good team. And that day, there's only me left now. I'm looking at the dark out there. But, O'Sullivan went on very, very late into his years. I can't remember how old he was. He might be 80, mightn't he? And the head of sport at the time came to me, and this is 10 years before he retired, and said, "Richard, you and Peter are good mates, aren't you?" I said, "Well, we get on well." He said, "Well, look, would you have a word with him quietly and see when he's going to retire? Because we've already got Jim McGrath, Aussie Jim, lined up and on contract, you see." So I went up to Peter and I said, "Oh, Peter, head of sports, just wondering, what are your thoughts about your future?" "Oh, I shall go on until I've done 50 years. Well, he'd done 40 at that time. And I went to the head of sport and said, "Another 10 years. Oh, my God." So they had to pay Jim for 10 years to do only very occasional broadcasts, but he was doing it for the racecourse. So very, very good. But while we're on O'Sullivan, it's quite good. 2 things, but one short one to start with. When he retired, he used to colour his own jockeys in and put comments on the race card, you see. And his last race card went to auction and went for something like 160,000, I think.
Wow.
J.P. McManus probably bought it. Anyway, before that happened, I said, "Look, Peter, we've had some great times. Could you just let me have one of your cards and sign it, please?" And he gave me one from the November and Newbury meeting, big meeting, all numbered and coloured and lots of scribblings in the side. But on the back of it, because it's fairly frugal, were 2 smaller field races from the same days, coloured in and everything. But in the margins were all his bets. 1,000 to 700. All his bets now. I've got it now. I really should frame it because it's lovely. The little message he put on the top was, "Dear Richard, it's been an honour and a pleasure to work with you." He was such a gentleman because he probably thought I was I know what he thought. When I joined the BBC, I went to him and said, "Peter, look, 2 days ago I was a jockey. Now I've got a microphone doing the paddock. Can you give me any advice?" He said, "Yes, Richard, keep talking rubbish like you did when you were a jockey." Oh, but the main story I want to get to was Timeform used to sponsor the first jump meeting at Chepstow in October every year to coincide when they're coming out with their big book. In those days, it cost 60, 70 quid. Anyway, so I hand over to Peter, and that's the last of them. They'll be lining up over to Peter O'Sullivan for commentary. And he said, "Yes, welcome everyone for the annual Timeform race to commemorate the new book. It's got 670 pages of great prose. It's got 360 colour photographs. It's got everything you need to know." And they're off and running. And the producer's shouting in his ear, "That's so-and-so's sake, Peter, they're off. And he totally ignored them. Going on, and I particularly like the essay on so-and-so. The man's going mad in his ear. And then Peter, without any compunction at all, said, oh, they're going to the second hurdle and so-and-so. He was God. He could do anything.
Yeah. Richard, I genuinely think that the standard of broadcasting has gone, I'd say, downhill in racing, with a few exceptions. But if you remember back in the day, you would, particularly Julian Wilson, he would certainly have a rant on screen about things that were right and wrong about the game, etc., etc. I just feel the coverage now is not the same. It's not as good.
No, but things have changed. You're talking 45, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
More. And things have changed. And we were very, very restricted to what we could do. They have great access now where they can put cameras. We fought for 10 years, and it was my suggestion, having been a jockey, to get a camera in the changing room at the Grand National. Of course, it was all run by military men who said no to everything. Don't want to be doing that, seeing half-naked people around, not at all. So I pushed hard for it, and they eventually let us put a stationary camera in there, no cameraman. And that went on for 10 years before they let us do it live. Now you've got cameras everywhere, don't you? And we had no access to anything. The time of the Void race at Aintree, I'd done my bit in the paddock. I'd take my overcoat off and unloosen my tie. I'm leaning back in the chair thinking, I'm going to enjoy this race. Blow me, 2 false starts. Some jockeys realised it and pulled up and didn't continue. Then a group of them did. Some horses fell. And when they got to the chair, there was Roger Farrant, the clerk of the course at Chepstow, who was on the team, waving at them to go round it. And they thought he was someone objecting to the race, so they just went over the top of him and continued. And we at the start, the people at the start were trying to stop them. No, they weren't having it. Anyway, S&S won it, John White on board. And the producer shouting at me in my earphone, Pitman, get your backside off. Get down there and find out what's happening. Well, I ran out. Yes, sir. My place was at the paddock on a scaffolding where cameras were as well, with planking for us to operate on. I ran out. It was raining. I slipped up. Little fat man, no coat on, winded. I'm lying on there going, when you're winded, you can't speak, can't breathe. Anyone doing presenting had a stage manager who got you where you had to go. And so he picked me up by my shirt, so I'm like a log, and he's got my overcoat in one hand, and he's taken me through the crowd, pushing them out of the way, got to the start where press were all round Keith Brown, the starter, and he pushed them all out the way, said, BBC, because we paid for the rights, so we had those ditties. He's pushed everyone out the way, and then stood me upright. I mean, I was like a log all the way through, then he stood me upright. And put the coat over my shoulder. And I said, Keith, we're live. We really want to know, so do our viewers in Hong Kong, want to know what can happen. And he told us exactly. Anything that's fallen or completed one whole circuit cannot run again if the race is rerun. And I do say if. So that was brilliant, a great job. So I backed out and they've gone on to something else, and I'm walking away quite pleased because I was a bit wet as an interview. Quite pleased with myself. So I'm walking across and I get another call in my ear from the producer saying, Pitman, find a steward now. The stewards in those days were in a porter cabin up scaffolding that was 4 ladders high. So you went up one onto a platform, across and up another. It was very high. So at the bottom was a guardsman from, I don't know, household cavalry with a big beefeater and a sword. And he said, sorry, sir, you can't come up here. And I was very quick-witted. I said, BBC, the stewards have asked us to go up. They want to make a statement. Well, they hadn't, you see. So he said, carry on. So cameraman, soundman and me have clambered up these 4 ladders. I've knocked on the door of the porter cabin and out came the late steward, Patrick Hibbert-Foy, you see. And he came up, yes, what? As a BBC, we want to know what can happen. The world is waiting to hear. He said, you will be informed after the paying customers on the racecourse have been informed. Goodbye. Shut the door. I mean, you don't believe it. Now, why I'm saying this is to correlate it with today. Now, stipendiary steward would come out, would explain. what was happening and why. And that's how it should be. There's so much more openness in the racing now. Of course, on a big team, you're going to like some, you're not going to like others, but I enjoy watching it. I really do. You're not going to like everyone.
Richard, who would be your favourites now to listen to? Or you enjoy the people's writing or broadcasting? Who would be your favourite?
Well, I don't see him around now, but his writing was amazing. Alistair Down,
Oh.
who was also on Channel 4.
Different class.
No, I like them all. I mean, to me, Ruby Walsh is the outstanding pundit with the current thing. And they have a huge team. I think they've got 19 people they can call on, different people in the paddock going round. Francesca's been off having a baby, but she'll be back for the flat. Alice Plunkett, Adele Mulray. And they've got a good team in that paddock. And what was marvellous at the Cheltenham Festival 3 years ago, a little chap from, I suppose, Cork, that you could hardly understand him, Mick Winters. What a big race. And there he is. And Alice is doing the interviews afterwards. And she said, "Oh, Mick, congratulations. Well done. I'm so pleased for you." But they do tell me that in Ireland, after a big race, you get down and you roll on the grass. Is that right? He said, yes. And he got down and went, roly-poly, 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 got up, continued the interview. Now, there wouldn't be many people as happy and jolly as Alice who would ask a question like that. But she did. So she fitted into that slot brilliantly. He was a character. She brought out the characteristics. So I'm not going to say who I like and dislike, but I'll tell you who has grown tremendously, Luke Harvey. I mean, Luke will do anything and everything. And he started off as the joker in the pack. And now the jockeys respect him. He gets good stuff out of them. He knows horses when he looks at them. And Luke is a serious broadcaster now with a jovial spirit. I'm not going to dissect it at all because everyone has their own opinion.
Yeah, but I mean, but back in the day, yourselves were leading the way. The BBC led the way for racing, without question. You got the voice of racing in Sir Peter, you got Julian Wilson, yourself. It was a great cast, really. You must have been really proud to be part of that because you helped build a really good brand for racing around that time.
Yes, I was proud to be a part of it, but I knew my position. Julian thought all our viewers read the Telegraph, the Times and the Guardian. He didn't realise that some of them read the Daily Mail and the Star and
the Red Tops, yeah.
So I did feel that I was a people's person and I liked people and I loved horses and I knew what I was talking about. So it was a great job to be paid to do that. Oh, blimey. It was marvellous. And it got you to some places you wouldn't have got to if you weren't doing it.
No, great part of your life, as well as your appearances in the saddle. But also, with regards to broadcasting, now, do you think that racing, it's not as good in terms of punditry as it was back then? I think BBC started something. I thought Alistair Down, John Frankham, Jim McGraw, Big Mac, rest in peace, really also took it forward again.
Yeah.
Did you feel as though towards the end of your time at the BBC, Richard, that maybe we were dumbing it down a bit?
We were shackled because of it being run by the military and we were considered as interlopers. And then they realised now that no, the television pays and the media rights pay the wages. So they are very aware of making themselves available. So things can happen now that would never have happened in the military-run days. When I won the champion hurdle, the Duke of Norfolk was there in the entourage. Lord Howard of Walden owned the horse, and they presented me with this little wine cooler, you see. And as they presented it to me, I turned it over to look to see if it was silver and see the hallmark. And the Duke of Norfolk tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Pitman, that is awfully bad manners." He said something, you should wait until at least you're in the weighing room before you shout. I mean, it was so military. Now, if a jockey was doing that, someone would take the mickey out of him live and say, "Oh, you're looking to see if it's silver, are you? Hey, a bit skint." And, and the other things, the front of having awards, I got a few, as you mentioned, Hennessy, Whitbread, all sorts of races, won everything by the Gold Cup International. But often in the race card, it would say so much to the winner, trainer, and a memento for the jockey. So when they didn't come, go to the clerk of the course, say, "Look, Hennessy says memento. Oh, no, we'll send you a check. Jockeys like money." I said, no, I want to remember that I've won the Hennessy. They had made for me a silver brandy glass on a marble base with an inscription on it. Now, wasn't that better than getting a few quid? Of course it is. But that's how they thought of jockeys. Now jockeys are very respected, and their opinions. Look at the very controversial things now where the sun is out in the winter and they're down at the start, and suddenly a jockey will say, look, I'm not very pleased about this, and 2 or 3 of them will say, a 10-minute wait while they dole the fences off.
How many times did they dole them up in your time?
Never.
What was it like? Give me your experience then, when the sun was low and it made it a little bit tricky sometimes. What were you feeling like? How was it to ride?
Well, I can tell you exactly. There were times where you didn't see a fence. But a horse's natural instinct is to come up. And a horse's eyesight is very, very good. Oh, you were approaching the fence and it would all be sort of black looking, and they'd come up most of the time. Sometimes they wouldn't. Life's changed. Health and safety is important. We used to ride with concrete posts all the way round.
I remember that, yeah.
Get mullered into one of those, you knew it. At Chepstow one day, going round the bottom bend, which is a long way from the stands, and there were no cameras then following you around, a sort of long lens camera that took up most of the atmosphere and things. Coming round the bottom bend, my horse slipped up, whacked me into this concrete post and knocked me out.
Oh.
So the horses galloped on, and even they weren't ambulances then that went round. Someone they thought was injured, they'd send a truck out, but they didn't follow around. It was ages before someone decided, well, he fell down the bottom there. We better go and look. They came down, put me in the back of a long wheelbase Land Rover and brought me back. Things have changed.
You were extremely tough buggers back then. You were really tough back in the day.
But can I just say on that, there were no body protectors, and the first year I rode, there were no chin straps on the helmets. They were cork bit. And if you hit a fence hard at full gallop and you're going out the front, quite often your helmet would go off in front of you. Life's changed. Health and safety, insurance, things have changed.
Yeah, you must have loved the adrenaline. In fact, just to come to a point, obviously you're approaching your 80th birthday, am I right?
I certainly am.
Right. Plan is to repeat another recent birthday, and you are planning to go over the fences at 80 on a horse. Is this right?
Oh, yeah. I did it when I was 75 for Jamie Snowden, went schooling over the fences at Lambourne, because Lambourne was where I started to get going. And I thought, wouldn't it be nice to revisit the place that, because I live only a few miles from Lambourne now, and I loved it. The adrenaline was superb. And although it wasn't particularly pretty, but I wasn't particularly pretty when I was a jockey, so it didn't matter. So anyway, I thought I'd like to do it. I still ride, and I thought I'd like to do it again when I'm 80, just, a last hurrah. And Fergal O'Brien was the first to say, oh, you school over my fence with my jockeys, and won't that be great? So yes. Sadly, I've had to postpone it because I'm having a little procedure that has forbidden me to ride a horse for a little while. So I'll probably do it in March, maybe. I want to do it. I love it. Galloping at speed and jumping at speed, which takes us on a gambling element and speed and hitting the ground. I worked for Fred Winter, who had all these American owners and film stars and people, no gamblers, apart from the former Ladbroke chairman, Cyril Steen, who only lasted 2 weeks with us because he'd ring up every breakfast time and say, how are my horses, Fred? Oh, yeah, they're fine, this one, that one. Oh, and what about Bueller today at Wincanton? Yeah, good each way shot. He'd be 10 to 1 on. So Cyril soon got the message and took his horses away. They went up to Michael Dickinson. But anyway, I used to ride for a lady who was a very, very good small trainer, one of the first lady trainers, called Barbara Lockhart Smith, and trained near Aylesbury. No Sunday racing in those days. I used to go up every Sunday and ride her horses schooling. And we'd jump 3 or 4 fences, go back to the farmhouse. She'd got Milton Keynes was being built at the time, so plenty of builders making dosh. And she'd invite people back, watch the schooling, back to the farmhouse, Bollinger. And sure enough, someone every Sunday would say, I'd love to get involved, love to have a horse. Well, anyway, this guy, really nice guy, never had one, called Jimmy Drabble. And he said, Barbara, I'd like a horse, but I'd like a bet. She said, oh, we can arrange that. Don't worry, So we bought this horse from Ireland, and it had run a few times, big, fat, backward yoke. So it came over, and she said, look, Jimmy, we won't bet it first time because it is big and backward, and I want a feeler of it. So anyway, we had 3 or 4 feelers, educating it, getting it better, fitter on the racecourse, which is illegal, but that's, getting it fitter, sharpening it up, and all this sort of thing. And then they decided today's the day. And it was the now defunct place in Kent, Y, not Folkestone, but Y, which was totally circular like a dog track, and it was on farmland. So Jimmy was told today's the day. And when I walked into the paddock, he said, Richard, I'll be backing this horse in all sorts of places around the world. Amazing where you can get money on. and it won't come back via the blower. It's going to be Australia and places. He was backing this flipping horse. And a jump meeting, why? He said, I put £1,000 on for you at 33 to 1. Wow. You know, I think the riding fee was £7.50 or something like that. So I'm thinking 33 grand, I buy a farm. No one's going to get past me. So I jumped out in front, being circular on the inside in front. People had to challenge on your outside, and you feel them and hear them coming. And when they're halfway up your outside, you pull the horse's head in, his backside went out, and it was like snooker. you push him off. So one by one, I was getting rid of the opposition, and you had to go around 3 times for 2 miles. It was amazing tight. And we're coming around the last bend. I'm in front, and I'm thinking 33 grand, wow. And done all my business to get where I was, and I've relaxed. And the horse thought, oh, stables are over there. Stables? It went hang to go to the stables, crossed its legs, and went down. Well,
oh my God.
When a horse goes down on the flat, it jackknifes in the middle, and it threw me upwards and over the rail into the middle of the course on the farmland. And I was always winded, little fat fellow, and I'm lying in the ground, like, oh, and I'm lying on the front, and I was convorting, I've got spasms.
Yeah.
The St. John's ambulance wouldn't touch me in case I broke my neck or my back. So they're waving for the ambulance or the doctor, and I'm lying there I've got mud in my eyes, mud in my nostrils, and I could just see through the legs this person pushing through the medics to come to me, and it was suede brogue shoes, some hairy legs, and a tweed skirt, and it was Mrs. Lockhart Smith. And she came through, pushing everyone out of the way, kicked me in the ribs and said, "Get up, you little Barsteward," which very apt, isn't it, considering who you are?
Yes.
And she'd been on for £1,000 at 33 to 1 as well.
Oh my God. This is adding to your career of like where you're thinking you've literally had the world at your feet on several horses that for one reason or another it hasn't happened. And then you have the big payday and then that happens.
Yeah.
And you still have a smile on your face about your life and everything. It's so
I love it. I love
joyous.
I love people. I mean, it's great. I'm on Twitter and I say things and I shouldn't because I disagree with people. A lot of punters talk through their pockets and I'll say, you're wrong. And they say, well, you're wrong. You've had concussion all your life. You've still got it. And they're pretty rude to you.
They do. It's a nasty place sometimes. Yeah,
it can be. It can be, yeah.
But you've certainly done racing ridiculously proud. Just carrying on then, as we sort of bring this pod to a close. Some questions I'd like to ask you now are to do with basically racing's issues at the moment. As in, we've had some massive fun there with some of your stories. But now the serious things. As in, like, when you were riding, Richard, the watering back then, it didn't take place, did it? You probably rode on firm ground and thought, this is firm.
Actually, in my days, you could ride on hard, and hard was hard. And that was stopped through health and safety because of the horse's legs. And a jump could do 35 miles an hour very easily. If it was a poor race and you're well, on the bridle, you could do 40 miles an hour. And I was clocked on Pendle at Chepstow doing 42 miles an hour. Wow. But between the last two, just when I let him go, come on, and he did 42 miles an hour between those fences. Now, if you hit the ground at 42 miles an hour, imagine being on a bus on the deck there, and jumping off a bus onto the pavement at 42 miles an hour.
That's going to hurt.
They're crazy. So it was right. They will not race with hard was in the description. Racing would not happen now. But we raced on everything. You raced on what was ever there. No, watering wasn't around. But it is a big discussion because it does cause false ground. But also, who'd want to be a clerk of the course making that decision?
A very difficult job. It is. Yeah. We've obviously been critical of clerks on the pod, and Andrew Cooper had the good grace to respond, and he absolutely earned me on a tweet. I said it wouldn't have happened in the days of Cal and Easy and Giants Causeway, and he said, well, I was Clark that day. It was brilliant Twitter at its best, absolutely earned the Barstewards, which was fantastic of Andrew Cooper. We know it's a very difficult job, but have you ever listened to Sir Mark Prescott's YouTube analysis on the ground and where we've gone wrong on what we've done? And now we're in a situation now where we can't reverse it. We have to keep watering.
Yeah. Mark Prescott is, without doubt, the outstanding thinker and orator. I mean, he's a great after-dinner speaker, but he'll only do it 3 times a year because he does brilliant. Now, if he and Mark Johnson who's just handed over the reins to Charlie, his son, up in Midland. If those two were on the BHA committee, well, I think racing would benefit. They're thinkers, real thinkers, and understand what's involved.
Yeah, we're getting a situation now, though. John has pointed this out on many pods before, in terms of tendon injuries to horses, that perhaps if it's loose on top and it's firm underneath, that's possibly more dangerous for the horse because the hooves are going in, but it's just false ground on the top. And we've had many instances of slip-ups on the flat recently.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised that this doesn't get more discussion and in the mainstream, to be honest. Because
you are totally correct there. And if you look at a horse's front legs, they weigh half a ton, most of them, some of them a bit more. Landing over a fence or galloping at the speeds they do on the flat, it's amazing that their bodies put up with it. They're like your ankle, their joint, and then the pastern between the ankle and the hoof is just a narrow little bit of bone and tissue. It's like the forks on a bicycle or a motorbike. Their legs absorb the concussion. And when a horse lands over a fence, if you get the moment it lands and it puts its hoof down, very shortly after, the ankle or the joint is on the ground too, because it's acted as, I don't know what you call those things.
Shock absorber.
Yes.
Shock absorber.
Man, John, I thought you'd gone home, John, and gone to the pub.
Right, you know when John's quiet on these pods, it means he loves it. He said it before when we've done specials. He listens to the guests and he's so enthralled with the guests.
I think he's nipped out and just come back in.
I think so. But look, he's let the dog out.
All I want to say is there any striking issue that you have that you want to cover now?
Indeed. Just to finish the show off, so obviously beauty of the broadcasting of the 1970s and 80s was all about betting. Like you've remarked about Sir Peter O'Sullivan's card, where he had his bet. Right. And the thing is now, how times have changed, where, say, ITV Racing now don't mention betting. And that's the strange thing, because betting is the forefront of the sport. That's why people watch. That's why people engage. It's like you own the horse. You've had a wager on. You're invested in that horse and the thrill of that when that horse wins. And are you shocked in the direction the game is going, re betting?
I was never a punter as a jockey. That's what Fred Winter said to me. Don't bet, don't get involved, don't even talk to a bookie. You stay as you are, stay honest and straight. So I know very little about punting, but I do like a little bet occasionally.
Yes.
But wouldn't do it every day. In fact, my only two bets of last year, I had a £5 each way accumulator at the Cheltenham Festival, which got me 690 quid back. That was very nice. And then I backed Noble Yates in the Grand National at 66 to 1 because he was screaming to be backed. And since then, I just had a tenner on a horse that my local butcher said he'd had a tip for. What a fool I am. Why not concentrate on what you're doing? But just go to Noble Yates in the National. He was ridden by Sam Whaley-Cohen, the best rider of Aintree. He's ridden 6 winners over the big fences, the Fox Hunters and the Beechers and all these sort of things. And he was riding the horse. His father had just bought Noble Yates, and yet they owned the horse that had finished 5th the year before. So if they had got one who'd finished 5th and they've just bought one they think's better, it's got a chance. Then it had finished 2nd previously at Wetherby to Ahoy Senor, who on the Thursday at Aintree wins a Grade 1 race. It's screaming at you to be backed.
Yeah. Richard, 2 questions from me to finish. One is this story true? I got told this many moons ago that you were once out all night. It was while you were married to Jenny Pitman, and she left a bowl of food on the doorstep.
Yes. Not quite, but it's a good story.
Okay.
In those days, the champagne houses all sponsored big races.
Yeah.
And I think Piper Heidsieck were doing the Grand National, and they put on to announce it somewhere in Marlborough, invited all the trainers around and it went on, and we all, we couldn't afford champagne ourselves, so we all got tittled up. It's not quite the ending you had, but it's a good story you put up. Anyway, I got home, Weathercock House, which she trained at in Lambourne. Door was locked. Went round another one, that was locked. So I thought, right, I'll break the flipping glass then. It's my house. And then I thought, no, you'll be paying for someone to mend it in the morning. So I went round the yard, and it was in the winter, so the top doors of the stable door were on a latch to let some air in, but not let freezing wind and snow in. So if I knocked on that door, I could tell if there was a horse in there without having to open each top door. And when I got to the corner box, which is twice as big as everywhere else, I knocked and it sounded hollow. I thought, oh, well, nothing in there. I'll go kip here. So I went in and I had the first time I'd ever afforded a lovely brown overcoat, camel hair coat. Oh, gorgeous. So I went in there, lay down, went to sleep. In the morning, woke up and there was a goat curled up in the fetal position and I'm cuddling it. So I thought, well, yes, okay. And I had a lot to drink, yeah. It was my downfall, I think, in many ways. But I went in and it was early before the lads had got there. The train was having a breakfast and I stank of goat. I mean, billy goats do stink. And there was hell to pay. And I had that coat dry cleaned 3 times, never got rid of the smell, had to burn it in the end. So there was no food on offer, but there was a rollicking.
No, I can imagine that. Final question is, I would like your horse this season that's took your eye for possibly spring festivals. Could be anything.
I've got one. Aidan O'Brien, a 2-year-old last year, be 3 this year, called Statuette. One word. Statuette, E-double-T-E.
Yep.
It won its only 2 races last year. I think the second one was a Group 2. They might both have been group races.
Yeah.
But a great big horse, and he didn't run it after it won its second race, put it away. And it'll be in the guineas. I'd be any price, I would imagine. And I don't know. I haven't checked, and it's not my place to do so. If it's okay, I don't know. But it won its only 2 races. You go back and have a look at them. And it was big. It was by a stallion called Justify, who Coolmore owned. Very good horse. But its half-sister, Tenebrism, won a maiden at Newmarket, then won the Cheveley Park. It's only 2 runs. Did win again, but didn't train on. And she was small. And this is much bigger and scopier. And if it's wintered well, it's one that, because it didn't run again in the second half of the season, people have forgotten about it. Statuette.
Fantastic. John, have you anything to add, Richard, before we finish?
That's been brilliant.
So absolutely. Honestly, Richard, you have been splendid. We're going to have to do this again. I think there's more to come from our chats.
It's been a pleasure, and I do ramble on, but we haven't obviously talked about Aintree and Crispin. There are so many other things that we can touch on.
Absolutely. Richard Pitman, thank you very much.
That's all from us for this show. We're back next week with Bob Cooper.
Bye for now.
Thanks a lot.